to work for the other minim. Lo masu lanu chachmei adoros eich nizar bem shalach mitzvah. We don't know how they work properly. We don't know the time limit of oat, of spelt and rye and barley. Who wants to take that responsibility? Who wants to take that? We have no such Masorah how to make them properly, the proper cleaning, the proper time. Who wants to take that upon themselves? A person should not make matzahs of the other 4 grains unless those who suffer from celiac and cannot have gluten. If from having a little wheat will really give them pain, what the level will be, speak to rabbis and doctors. But if they can't have wheat, so then efshir lahatir lafos, then maybe they could have the option of the other grain, but certainly ask a shiloh. That means, for example, we have a relative in our family who does not have wheat, only spelt. That means someone else should not be eating the spelt. If you can have wheat, even though he or she might be at your table with spelt, we're not going to view it as chametz. At the same time, you should not be eating the spelt because we don't have a true Masorah. It was just left as a harasha for those who really need it. That's very important to know. Very halach l'maisa. Now, what gets really interesting is...
But you're saying to be mekayim the mitzvah or stam? A person shouldn't eat spelt matzah if he can eat matzah?
Yeah, there are 2 points. One is mekayim the mitzvah, but more importantly is it might be chametz. We're not saying it's chametz. We don't have the Masorah of it. So we're not contending that, accusing that person of having chametz, chas v'shalom. But for us, why rely on a very b'diavad situation? We really don't know if we have that which rely on chita. Yeah. So.
But the eating matzah is only a chiyuv on the first night. So can you eat it during the rest of the week?
Yeah, because since it might be chametz, for us who don't need to have the spelt, we should really stay away for the 7-8 days of Pesach.
Okay, I want to get back to that bracha on the apple.
Yeah.
How can you make a bracha if you're making barbecues on the apple and the pomegranates are off the table? That's as if they don't exist. How can you go ahead and make a bracha on the pomegranate?
Excellent question. So there's a concept that you are in your house. I have I say mazonos on, I don't know, whatever I'm saying, mazonos on cookies. And then I take some crackers out of the closet. It works on the crackers. Why? Because I know what's in my house. I'm aware of what's in my house. Even though it's not in front of me, even though it's in another room, there's a concept that my bracha is on anything. And even if I thought I only have the cookies, poskim, no, you don't just stop at the cookies. That might lead to the crackers and to the cake. So there's some understanding that your bracha is on everything in the house. Now, let's say you're a guest at someone's house, you don't know what they have, what they're going to serve. So then your bracha might be very limited to what's in front of you, not to something else. But some poskim say, no, I don't know what's here, but whatever they bring me, I'm okay. I know whatever they're going to serve me, it's going to cover everything. But that's a Hilchos Brachos topic for another time. I won't digress too much. It's not a question of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah. It's just a question of just brachas on birchas hanen. It's a slightly different point, but it's a slightly different. Yeah, Keith.
So we know that if he says that we know that it's quicker to become chametz,
right?
The spout and things like that. So like, what is the measure? Like, why do we need a Masorah? Do we know if we already know that it's quicker to become chametz? How do we know that? What are we looking at to see that it's coming?
Very good. So the Gemara does talk about there's certain features when you begin to let bread bake, begins to have certain cracks in them. Right. And there's certain simanim that tell us it's chametz. So I guess borrowing from whatever terms are being used for wheat, they've now applied to spelt, rye, and whatnot. So now they sense that apparently it becomes chametz much quicker. Barley.
So they're saying that those simanim may not be applicable to spelt?
No, I think it is applicable. No, it's applicable, and that arrives much sooner than with wheat.
If we know it. So
but
the question of why do you need Masorah?
So because it's so the seconds are so small, and even though we see it develop, we're not sure if 10 minutes is good enough. Again, people have made oat matzah. They made spelt matzah, but at the same time, since we don't have the Masorah, we may not be so precise in how to interpret the simanim. We know the simanim for wheat are absolute, but we're not so sure if it's going to be just as absolute when it comes to spelt, rye, and whatnot. So the ma'aseh probably will be applicable, but we're talking about chametz, which of course is an iser kares, and nobody really wants to get involved in that element. Okay, now let's talk about oats for a moment. There's a fascinating discussion about what is shibboleth shua. We mentioned the 5 grains in the Mishnah. Shibol Shul, we interpret it as oats, which is the interpretation. You open up a dictionary, it means oats. Now look what number 9, Rav Moshe Sternbach writes. Tshuvas v'hanagos. Those who can't eat chita, someone with celiac, Shamati, I heard, she'ofen hayom b'miyuchad matzos shmura. They made matzos shmura mishibol shul, which he defines as kveker, which is Quaker oats. V'yotzin bazeh, and you fulfill the mitzvah shezehu mechamesh minim. It's one of the 5 grains we saw in the Mishnah. Ubekobet shari tzion, this particular sefer, this pamphlet that came out, hochiach, it proves she'akveker shalanu, our oats, eino hashibol shua. It's not shibol shua. Sharei hakveker eino machmitz klal. The Quaker, the oats, apparently don't become chametz. How do they know it doesn't become chametz? Because those features we described when wheat rises and begins to bake has these cracks. Oat bread doesn't have that. Doesn't have those features. V'toim ha'olam, we are all mistaken. She'akveker hu mechamesh zaminim. We think it's one of the 5 grains. Oats, it's not. Vimkein lididei, according to this understanding, ein yotzin bazeh yidei chovas matzah. We do not fulfill the mitzvah. V'tzarech lachapes min acher shelo yaz. We have to find another min, such as spelt, which is very, very expensive, but it's certainly on the market. But don't play with oats, because oats may not be 5 grains. It might not be matzah. It won't be chametz, but it won't be matzah either, based on this discussion. Now, what exactly would it be? So you look at number 10. There's a machlokus Rishonim what exactly is shibol shual. Rashi writes, avina, which apparently is Latin for oats. That's what we understand. Other Rishonim have a different interpretation. It's some type of subspecies of barley. What it is, I don't know. They describe different features. I don't know how, but it's slightly different than actually barley. Now, the proofs they bring, we'll see in a second. There's a Professor Felix, and the Rosh Hashanah is going to address him in just a moment. He proved from many sources in Chazal that oats is not barley. One of the proofs, outside from it doesn't become chametz, whatever chametz is, it also what?
Oats is not barley?
Oats is not shibol shul. So one of the proofs is that it doesn't turn into chametz. Second proof is there's a Mishnah Kalayim, which talks about different species crossbreeding. One of the examples is Seora and shibol shul. If you try to crossbreed oats and barley, it won't work. If you try to cross the subspecies of barley with barley, it will work. Tells us that shibol shul is not oat because it doesn't crossbreed. Third raya, the Mishnah describes how shibol shul grows in rows, nice rows. Oats, again, apparently does not grow in rows. It grows however it grows. And for this reason, Professor Felix proved that shibol shul is not oats, and you should not use oats for matzah. You seemingly shouldn't say mazonos on it either. You shouldn't say al michya. It's just something that it's a vegetable, grows from the ground. It's like quinoa. It's a vegetable that might look, taste, seem like pasta, like a grain, but it's not one of the grains. Don't have oats. Okay, now we get into the last 10 minutes of fascinating discussion. Rav Shlomo Zalman, I think in your sheets it did not come out nicely. It's got very dark. I need to fix that. But let me read for you a letter Rav Shlomo Zalman wrote. So don't try to follow along. You won't be able to read it, I don't think. So he says, Me'olam la marti. In my whole life, Rav Shlomo Zalman says, I never said Lishanos meha Mesora v'Shulchan Aruch. Never did I say that a person should change the Mesora, change the Shulchan Aruch. What a Mesora is, what a Shulchan Aruch says, we must keep. Ukemo she'ein shomim l'Professor Flix. We don't listen to him. Shu shomer mitzvos. He was a learned guy, observant too. And he proved he had a sefer called Tzomeach b'Torah, that growths agriculture in Torah. Sheshibola shual hu lo mashikorin hayom. What we call kveker oats is not the shibol shul. That he tried proving. The ein shomim lo, we don't listen to him. Umivarchin mizonos. We go against what his proofs are. V'chein, he proved that the tamcha hanikra chrein, when it comes to maror, what we call chrein, may prove that can't be chrein. Chrein is sharp, not bitter. He proved also they did not have this chrein in the times of Chazal. We don't listen to him. Afal pikein, even though he proved otherwise, ein shomim lo. We keep our Mesorah. So no matter how much the historians, the professors, they want to prove otherwise, that it wasn't the case, we have a Mesorah that b'shbol shul is oats. A person who has celiac can't have wheat and wants to fulfill their mitzvah with oats or spelt, either one, according to the way Rav Shlomo Zalman writes, is completely fine. Now, The last few minutes I want to mention a beautiful discussion regarding the importance of Mesorah. Rav Shechter in his Sefer Nefesh Harav, so he talks about this concept of holding on to our Mesorah. And even if our Mesorah might appear to be wrong, it might appear to have evolved and developed over time, our Mesorah is our Mesorah. There's a Gemara in Kedushin Daf Lamed. The Gemara says that the Vav of Gachon, we'll read in a few weeks in the Parsha, the Vav of Gachon is the halfway point, the midpoint to all the Osios in the Torah. We're told there's 600,000 letters in the Torah. Not really true. They're more than that. But whatever the amount is, the Vav of Gachon is the midpoint of the Torah, of all the Osios. So if Yosef says, oh, what? So if Yosef says, well, is the Vav itself the right side, the first half, or the left side? Which part? So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Well, don't ask me. Don't be lazy. Open up a Sefer Torah and count. Now, of course, it might take a couple of days to do that, but start counting 1, 2, and you'll figure out which side the Vav is on. Problem is, I can't really do that, he says. You know why? Because we're not bekiim in all the chaseros and the yaseros, the extra letters, like there might be a vav, or maybe not. The word, the totofos, might be with a vav, maybe it's not a vav. There's a yud here, maybe missing. We don't know the chaseros and the yaseros, so we don't know the exact number of letters, so it won't work. So then, based on this Gemara, the Ramah Paskins, if you find the Sefer Torah, there's a mistake in it, you have to replace it. But let's say that mistake is there's an extra vav, or it's missing a vav. That's not a mistake, because we don't have a Mesorah. We lost that Mesorah of the Yiseros and the Chaseros. That's the Ramah Paskins based on the Gemara. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik argued on this psak. He says we don't hold like this Ramah. Whatever Sefer Torah we have in the Aron Kodesh, that is our Mesorah. Even though it might be different than 500 years ago, that's our Mesorah. That becomes our Mesorah. We are Bekim and Yiseros and Chaseros. Whatever we have, that's precise. That's exact. He goes against it. He's a whole nother wild interpretation from this Gemara, but he goes against it. Our Mesorah is absolute, even though it might be different. So even though he doesn't talk about this case, the oats, you might want to prove that the oats are different than Shibal Shua. We don't care what you want to prove in the history. Right now, our Mesorah is that it means Shibal Shua's oats, and that's what we have to embrace. Now, interesting conversation for the last 5 minutes. Can you bring back a lost Mesorah? Let's say you lost Mesorah. Up until now, we said you've maintained. You had a continuous Mesorah. Our Mesorah is oats Shibal Shul. Our Mesorah is whatever Chaseros, Yiseros in the Torah. That's final. But let's say you lost the Mesorah. For example, you lost the Mesorah of Tchelis. Could you bring back, using scientific, historical proofs, what the Mesorah once was? Can there be a break in Mesorah and bring it back? So Rav Shechter says that the following. We mentioned earlier rice. 5 grains, you say mazonos, al michya, or hamotzi, and benching of its bread. Rice is unique. Orez, the Gemara calls it. You say mazonos beforehand and burn nefashos afterwards. There's a big machlokas, Rashi Tosfos. Does orez mean rice, or does it mean something called millet? Which one is it? Some say you should say mazonos on millet and a shackle and mazonos. Which one is it? So our custom certainly is to say mazonos on rice. Never had millet, but if you were to have millet, it would be a pradama of some sort. So either way, the many poskim, since that was a machlokas, we lost the Mesorah. Even though right now, it's been accepted that rice is orez and you say mazonos, since there was a break in the Mesorah, the very fact that Rashi Tosas argue what to say, which one's rice, which one's millet, we lost the Mesorah. Many poskim will not eat rice outside of a meal. They won't have it separate because it might not be rice. It really might be millet. Everyone now assumes orez is rice. I don't care. We lost that train. We lost Mesorah. You can't bring back a lost Mesorah. So too, the Beis Halevi has a discussion when it comes to Tchelis. We lost Tchelis. And there's the Radziner Tchelis. He brought back Tchelis, not the same Tchelis that you see nowadays. A bit of a different one. He tried proving based on which fish or snail and other types of proofs. And even if you want to prove it, the Beis Halevi says, even if you have all the greatest proofs from the Midrashim and the Gemaras, in the end of the day, we lost the Mesorah. You can't bring it back until Mashiach comes. If it's not part of the Mesorah anymore, it's lost forever. You need to have a Mesorah for halacha l'maisa, how to pass things. You can't create things. Now, one final proof he had that you need a Mesorah, which is a fascinating proof, is as follows. The Gemara talks about there are certain words that the Chachamim didn't know what they meant. For example, Seirugin. They didn't know what Seirugin meant. And the Gemara Megillah Yud Ches says they once heard the Amsa of Rabbi, his maidservant. She explained that when the rabbis are going to stop going back and forth, Seirugin, Seirugin. That's what Seirugin meant. So asks Rav Schechter, so why didn't they open up a dictionary? Well, we have to wait because the dictionary wasn't Masorah. Apparently the Amasa of Rabbi had a Masorah from her master Rabbi. Rabbi had the Masorah, how to define words. You can't just figure things out based on dictionary, based on science, based on history, based on language. You have to have a Masorah. You can't bring back a Masorah if it was lost. However, in the footnotes, they bring down a great question the Talmidim asked. The Rosh doesn't bring an answer for this response. But there's some fascinating Agadata Gemaras in Baba Basra. Rabbi Bar Chana had many journeys throughout the desert. And an Arab showed him many locations, for example, where the crack in the ground was of Korach Valdaso. They're saying Moshe Emes, Sarasa Emes. He also showed where the Mesei Midbar were buried, Klaisa, where they were buried. And he saw their tzitzis, how they were tied, and he was able to paskin Beis Hill, Beis Shammai, big machlokas, how to paskin. But when he came back, he forgot what the tzitzis looked like. They said, I forget what they called him some name. You should have cut off the tzitzis and bring us the evidence. And you have to remember and you forget it. That was the Gemara. But the Maisa, wasn't this a lost Masorah? Elimai, you could see you could bring back a lost Masorah even though there's a break in the chain. That was the question. I believe the response might be is one of two. Either we say you don't learn halacha from Agadata. It's a fun, nice story, but don't bring halachic conclusion from Gemara. Or they were the Masorah. Here's the Mesei Midbar. They had the best Masorah. They were part of the Masorah. We may have lost the connection, but if you go back to Moshe Rabbeinu, go back to Aaron Cohen, so they're the Masorah, and you can figure out the answer based on them. But based on scientists, based on historians, that's not part of the Masorah. That you can't bring back. Okay, we'll stop here. Everyone have a wonderful day.
And once things change, whether we have a fixed calendar or whether we have...
Yeah, that's what he said. He said whatever we have, it becomes Masorah.